Hey, Johnny boy, do you think the people should give the video a big thumbs up? Johnny boy says yes. Hey, I'm Chicken Johnny. I'm out here by the garden, the field here. We got it sort of broke up a little bit after the winter. Made one pass with the cultivator on it, and looks like it's dry enough. I'll make a couple of passes with the rototiller where I'm about to plant potatoes. But that's not what I'm here to talk to you about. Let's get in out of the wind. Well, now it's too dark. There we go. So there's 5 things that I've stopped doing in the garden, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. 5 things I no longer do in my garden. The first one is plastic mulching. Now I'll show you the machine, and I've showed you this before, but this here is the plastic mulcher, right here. And this is the plastic mulch. Comes off of this wheel. It's 4 feet wide, and it covers the field, gives me about a 3-foot bed. There's also, up on this device, there's a roll of drip tape that goes underneath the plastic. And then, this machine over here, the mechanical transplanter, one person sits on this machine here, and he drops the plants in as you go through the field. Well, last year, well, the year before last was the last year I used it. And I'll tell you why. Number one, it's not environmentally friendly. That plastic ends up in a landfill somewhere. Now, in my case, they won't take it in a regular dumpster. But I found out it still doesn't go to a recycling company, even though I'm told that that's where it's going. So we have to pay extra to get it hauled away. By the time you figure that in, it's just not worth it. Now, some people burn it, but I can't even begin to start to tell you what's wrong with that. The second reason I don't use it is because it really doesn't keep the weeds down. It keeps the weeds down right around the plants, but really right around the plants isn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem is once you put that plastic down, the equipment that I have, I can't run it through the field to cultivate the rows to get the weeds out of the in-between areas without tearing that plastic up. So I'd have to use a herbicide. And the reason that I bought the plastic layer was to avoid using herbicides. So I suppose if you had a farm that didn't have a weed problem, or if you had a way to, really cultivate between the weeds, and hey, the big farms do, and you had a way to get rid of the plastic, it might not be a bad idea. Except that the other problem is mice, voles, and rats get underneath that plastic. It's nice and warm. They build a house under there and they eat every single one of my sweet potatoes, or at least they did 2 years ago. And so I grew sweet potatoes to feed the rats that were destroying everything else on the farm. So I'm not using it anymore. Another thing I don't use, and we got to walk out in the wind for that, I don't hill my fields anymore. Whew. Let's see if I can get that camera I don't hill my fields anymore, and the reason that I don't is because it makes it hard to cultivate later. Now, here's the machine that I made. This is a hiller, and it's got a number of baffles inside of it. Hooks up to the 3-point hitch on the tractor, and it makes some really beautiful hills. But I don't use it anymore. And the reason I don't use it is because once you plant in those hills, they begin to break down from the wind and the rain, and they begin to break down just from the cultivating that you're doing around the plants, and it makes it very difficult to get in and around and cultivate those plants. Now, I'm sure there's a context in which hilling really makes a difference. Some of the big farms have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to get multiple row bed formers to raise these beds up and to plant into them. I no longer plant in raised beds. It just doesn't fit with my equipment. The third thing I don't do anymore, I don't try to be organic with my pesticides. Now, at the end of the day, I try to be, maybe trying to be organic isn't really what I'm saying. I try to be as good to the soil as I can be. I want to try to feed the soil, not the plants, and I want to do my best to create a sustainable method of farming. But one of the things I discovered last year was that when you try to be organic with pesticide, you can run into a problem that you can't get turned around in time. I tried to be organic when I got potato bugs on my potatoes. And so I used a agricultural soap that you can buy, and I sprayed that on the plants. That didn't work. So I tried neem oil. That didn't work. I tried BT. That sort of worked. In fact, I thought I had it whipped, but came back from being away for several days and my potatoes were gone. It doesn't take long for the Colorado potato bug to completely devastate a potato crop. Now, you may be thinking, well, there's a number of things that you could have done differently. You could grow your potatoes in raised beds, or in raised garden beds, or you could raise them in buckets, or you could raise them in barrels. Well, I'm about ready to plant 200 pounds of seed potato, and I'm hoping that the yield on that 200 pounds of seed potato is somewhere around 1,000 to 2,000 pounds of potatoes. And I just don't think that I've got the time or the ambition to do that in barrels or buckets. That'd be a lot of barrels and a lot of buckets. And the fourth thing that I no longer do is tarp my fields. Now, tarping is actually a pretty good method. If you've got a field that you can cover with a tarp and you're in an area where it's not real windy, you can cover it in the fall, leave that tarp over for the entire winter. You can get into that garden much quicker because that ground will be dry and ready to work, and it'll thaw out and heat up faster than if you didn't tarp it. But here's the problem. The wind out here is so strong that no matter how many tires and no matter how many fence posts and how many bricks I laid out on that tarp, it still got lifted up. When I finally got enough underneath it to keep it from getting lifted up, it got torn to shreds. And the amount of work that it took to lay that tarp out and the amount of work it took to pick that tarp up, maybe if you live in a place where there's not much wind, maybe that'll work really well for you. But out here, no way. I know I've watched some of the bigger market farmers using their tarps, and they say, we just roll this tarp over here to the side and just leave it to the side of the field, and when we're ready to use it again, we pull it out. There's little labor involved. Well, you couldn't do that here. Your neighbors would be complaining about the tarps on their fields, and they may not want tarps on their fields. Or if you're in a residential neighborhood, tarps on their houses. Listen, I'm not saying it's a bad plan. I think it's a good idea, and I think it could work well. It's just not for me. So I stopped using silage tarps. I've got an 80 by 100 silage tarp up in the attic of my barn that I could put down tomorrow. But, well, it's not really big enough to do much, but also it'd just fly away. I might try using tarps a little bit more in the future in some different applications, but not on the field. So no tarps for Chicken Johnny. So number 5, I stopped broadcast fertilizing on my fields. Now it's easy to do and it works fairly well, and fertilizer is really not that expensive. Now bear in mind, I do put out organic fertilizer over the entire field, and that takes a while to become available to the plants, but it does a good job, and it cuts down on the amount of non-organic fertilizer that I'm required to put down. But I no longer just broadcast that over the entire farm. I used to take a spreader and put it on the 3-point hitch and spread the fertilizer out over the entire field. I don't do that anymore, mainly because most of that fertilizer just ends up feeding your weeds, and also you end up with the problem that fertilizer is shedding off into the waterway. And we've got a little creek not too far from us, and if that fertilizer makes it down into the drain tile, it's going to make its way into that watershed, and if it makes its way into that ditch, it's going to get down to the creek, and if it gets to the creek, it's going to get to the river, and eventually it's going to end up down there by Cajun Hydroponics down there in Mississippi. And I don't think that's good for the environment. So instead, I side dress my fertilizer. We use a lot less fertilizer, and because it's closer to the plants will take it up a lot more easily, and a lot less of it will be wasted in the field. So those are the 5 things that I've stopped doing on the garden. And it is really windy out here, so I think I'm going to go in and start cutting potatoes, getting those ready to go in the ground tomorrow morning. We've got a little bit of a window of time before it rains tomorrow afternoon. I got to get the potatoes in before that happens, because if I don't, it's supposed to rain for the next 5 days. And then it'll be at least a week and a half before I get the potatoes in the ground, and that's going to set me way back. So, the Mitzvah Shem, I'll see you again. I'm Chicken Johnny. Eat your vegetables.